Detective Sergeant Mary Ann lives in a small town in Easttown, Pennsylvania. She lives with her mother, Helen, her teenage daughter, Siobhan, and a 4-year-old grandson, Andrew. Following in the footsteps of her father, Mary Ann became a detective, but before he could witness her growth, a young 13-year-old mare lost her father to depression when he shot himself to death. Growing up, she formed a basketball team with some of her friends, and back in the day, they even won a state championship, earning Mare the title of Lady Hawk. She's spent all of her life in this town and knows pretty much everyone. Early one morning, when Mare is still in her bed, she gets a call from Betty Carroll. Despite her sleep being disturbed, Mare goes to Betty's place. Betty reveals that someone was being a peeping Tom and was looking at her granddaughter changing her dress. Mare reminds her that she'd rather call the police station for such a matter, as she has more pressing matters at hand. However, she steps out to the backyard and notices a CCTV camera. Mr. Carroll had this camera installed a few months ago in their backyard, but it hasn't been working. While Betty and her husband start arguing about the surveillance camera, Mare walks out. That day, Mare's ex-husband, Frank, calls her multiple times, but all his calls are ignored. Apparently, Frank wants to tell her about his engagement with a lady named Faye. Mare arrives at the station where the chief police officer, Carter, calls her into his room. He plays the broadcast of a woman named Dawn, shaming the police department for not being able to find her daughter, Katie, who disappeared a year ago. Now that Dawn has gone to the media, the police are pressured to reopen Katie's case. The chief informs Mare that a county detective is being sent to assist them regarding the case. Meanwhile, Mare thinks Katie is probably dead somewhere, as she was a drug abuser with a history of prostitution. Next, a newbie officer named Trammell calls Mare to ask her to come to Betty Hanlon's house where a burglary has taken place. She thinks it's the work of her drug addict brother, Freddie. On her way to Beth, Mare spots Freddie on the road, and upon chasing him, she sprains her ankle. Freddie also injures his hand while jumping over the fence. She hunts him down and calmly asks him to surrender. Beth also comes over and punches Freddie for causing the trouble. Still, she does not wish to press charges against him. Mare informs her that the company has cut off the heat in his house and asks Beth if she can take him in. Beth herself is in a tight spot, so she can't take him to her house. Therefore, Mare has Trammell drive Freddie to the shelter for a weekend while they fix the heat issue. Only when Mare gets home, she comes to know about Frank's engagement from her mother. Helen, Siobhan, and even her cousin Dan knew about the engagement, and she's the only one kept in the dark. Frank has always been good with Mare's family, even after their separation. They're all invited to the party that evening at his house, which happens to be right behind Mare's house. Meanwhile, Erin McMenamin is a young mother of DJ who lives with an alcoholic and abusive father named Kenny. Kenny's made it very clear to her that he won't spend a penny for DJ's ear surgery, claiming that he's been doing more than enough with DJ's other essentials. So when Dylan, DJ's father, comes over to get the child for the weekend, Erin asks him to pay for the surgery. But Dylan simply says that he doesn't have the money. Brianna, Dylan's new girlfriend, tells Erin not to text her man ever again and warns her that she's going to get her. After passing the threat, they drive away. In the evening, Mare's family opts for Frank's engagement ceremony. The same night, Mare and her former basketball teammates are being honored on the 25th anniversary of their state championship. Later in the bar, she meets Richard, who reveals that he's an author and has come to Easttown as a guest lecturer. Mare has not expected Frank, Faye, and their mutual friends to come to the same bar after the party. So, upon seeing them, she urges Richard that they go somewhere else. Once they reach Richard's place, they end up bouncing in the bed. On the other hand, Erin can't wait to meet Brendan, with whom she's been talking for the past few weeks. But before heading to her little date, she stops by her best friend Jess's house, where her mother gives Erin a makeover. Riding her pink bike, she reaches Sharp's Wood, and Brendan messages her to meet by the bridge trail. However, a group of teenagers led by Brianna comes to her at the bridge. It turns out that there's never been a Brendan, only Brianna catfishing Erin. Soon, Brianna starts hitting Erin right in front of Dylan, while the others are busy recording it. Siobhan and her friends see battered Erin and go to her rescue. Worried, she asks Erin if she needs a ride back home, but Erin just walks away on her own. The next day, when everyone's morning is starting in the usual way, there's a naked, cold body of Erin lying in Creedham Creek, and it looks like she was shot in the face. Apparently, a hiker found Erin's body early in the morning and reported it to the police. As soon as Mare and the other officers get the news, they arrive at the scene and start their work. Before heading to Kenny's house, Mare calls her best friend, Lori. She then asks for her husband John and his brother Billy to meet her there. John and Billy are Kenny's cousins, so it would be better to take them with her to inform him about his daughter's death. On hearing the unfortunate news, Kenny breaks down into tears. Mayor asks him a few questions related to Aaron, and with the information he has, Kenny believes that Dylan is the one who killed Aaron. In the next scene, Dylan is called in for an interrogation. He tells Mayor that he last saw her at the Sharps Wood, but since they were not on good terms, he didn't approach her. Mayor asks him what time he left the woods, and he answers that he left at 11:45 and reached home at midnight. While they're in the middle of the interrogation, Brianna calls Dylan a couple of times. Mayor tells him that he can pick it up, but Dylan doesn't do so. Before letting Dylan leave, Mayor warns him that he better not be lying about anything. However, Dylan tells her that he didn't freaking kill her and walks out of the room. That afternoon, Mayor discloses finding Aaron's body to the media and appeals to the citizens to come forth if they have seen or heard anything related to the murder. The reporter asks if this case is related to Katie's case. The chief mentions that since they don't know what happened to Katie Bailey, at least for now, they can't rule out that these two cases are related. Immediately, Dawn explodes and asks what happened to her daughter, even though it has been a year. Her question gives rise to a clamor. Then, to calm down the raging crowd, the chief reveals bringing in a county detective to assist them. When Mayor returns back to her cabin, Detective Colin Zabel has been waiting for her. Despite his young age, he's the said county detective who's been praised for solving an old case in Upper Darby last year. He introduces himself to Mayor, only to receive a cold shoulder from her. Later that day, the police get the video footage of Brianna assaulting Aaron in the woods. Mayor notices Siobhan in the video, so she calls her but couldn't get through. Then, along with Colin, she goes to Brianna's parents' restaurant. Although Colin is against arresting the kid in front of the guests, he could not stop Mayor from doing so. Brianna's parents, especially her father Tony, couldn't stomach Mayor's behavior. Back in the station, Mayor tries to scare Brianna by pointing out the charges she could face, but the girl refuses to speak and demands a lawyer. In a fit of rage, Brianna mentions that because of her horrible attitude, her son killed himself. Colin calls for a break and has a guard take Brianna away. Meanwhile, Mayor receives a bouquet of flowers in her workplace from Richard with his number written on a note. She calls him, but before she could make excuses about work, he invites her to the party organized for his book reading anniversary. Mayor tells him that it's really not a good time for her to attend such a function, but still, she asks Richard for the date of the event. Late at night, when Siobhan comes home, Mayor confronts her about sneaking into the woods the other night and being one of the people who met Aaron before she died. Mayor is angry because Siobhan has hidden this information from her. In all honesty, Siobhan then reveals what she saw last night. In the morning, Mayor pays a visit to a pediatrician to talk about Andrew's tics. She tells her that their son Kevin had similar tics as a young boy and then was diagnosed with Tourette's, pervasive developmental disorder, and mood disorders. Mayor's worried that it might be hereditary. The doctor tells her that tics are normal among growing children, but if it gives her peace of mind, she can take Andrew to a neurologist. In the station, Colin tries his best to befriend Mayor, and his efforts soften her a little. Then their day starts about interrogating about 40 kids, including Jess. After the interrogation, they find that some kids saw Aaron arrive on her bike around 10 p.m., and a witness said that it was gone around 12 p.m. However, no one heard the gunshot. Also, Aaron's phone's last location was shown to be 13 miles away from Sharps Wood. In the evening, when Mayor is just about to leave for Richard's party, Brianna's father, Tony, comes to block her path and tells her that he won't let her ruin his daughter's life. Just then, his wife Patty tries to stop him from acting out, but he drives after Mayor. At the party, Richard's been so swamped by the guests that he couldn't give Mayor the time of day. This causes Mayor to walk off from the party. She gets into her car when Richard comes running after her and convinces her to stay for a while longer. Later on, when Mayor's on her way back home, she stops by Dawn's gas station, and even there, Tony follows her. Noticing something wrong with them, Dawn asks Tony to leave Mayor alone. Later that night, Tony causes Mayor's window glass to shatter by throwing a gallon of milk. The same night, Kenny locates Dylan and sneaks into his car. He holds Dylan at gunpoint and forces him to drive to the turnpike. Upon arriving at their destination, Kenny orders Dylan to run, and as expected, he fires a bullet at him. Meanwhile, Jess and her mother come to meet Lori as Jess has a huge revelation to make. She tells Lori that Dylan is not the real father of DJ, and above that, she thinks the baby is of Frank Sheehan, as she's seen Frank in front of Aaron's house with diapers and baby formula. The next morning, John and Billy frantically search for Kenny as he disappeared with a gun. Nevertheless, they find him in the same creek where Aaron's body was found. He then confesses to shooting Dylan with that same gun. On the other side, the forensic doctor concludes Aaron's time of death was between 12 p.m. and 2 a.m., and there are no signs of sexual assault. As for the missing part of the index finger, it appears to have been severed by a bullet. Mayer comes to the conclusion that Aaron was killed somewhere else before being dumped into the woods. This also explains her missing bike and also how no one heard the gunshot. Just then, she gets a call from John. Moments later, Kenny's brought into the police station. Without much effort, he admits to killing Dylan. However, Mayer discloses that Dylan is alive as the bullet barely missed his vital organs. At that moment, Dylan has been hospitalized. Amidst the ongoing case, Mayer has her own personal problems. Andrew's mother, who's been rehabilitating from the addiction, is going to fight her for Andrew's custody. And then there's Helen, who keeps on reminding Mayer that both she and Andrew should get prepared. Just then, Lori walks into Mayer and Helen fighting with each other. As soon as Lori tells her what Jess has said to her the other day, she heads straight to Frank and calls him out. But since Faye's son has come to visit him, he asks her to postpone things for tomorrow. Mayer gets angry and lashes out at her for lying about barely knowing Aaron. Frank excuses himself to talk with Mayer. Siobhan, who's embarrassed by her parents fighting, comes out of the house to ask what's going on. Mayer tells her that there's a rumor that Frank's the father of Aaron's baby. She asks him to take the paternity test, and Frank readily agrees. However, this shambles his relationship with Faye. The very next day, Mayer visits Dylan's parents at the hospital and asks them to convince Dylan for the DNA test. They're dumbfounded when she tells them that Dylan might not be DJ's real father. Back in the station, Aaron's cell phone records have been retrieved, and according to those, the last call was made to Deacon Mark Burton at 10:55 p.m. Deacon Mark is a priest at St. Michael's Parish where Mayer's cousin Dan is the father. A few days ago, Father Dan had a conversation with Deacon Mark as he remembered Aaron being in the youth program of the church before she had her baby. He asked Deacon Mark if he knew Aaron well during her time in the church or if he was in touch with her after she left. His answers to both questions were, not really. Mayer and Colin visit Deacon Mark in the church and ask him what Aaron and he discussed on the phone. Mark tells them that the call lasted for a couple of minutes. Aaron sounded very upset about the betrayal she suffered, but said nothing specific. Mayer questions him why Aaron would call him instead of her friends. Mark tells them that he makes sure to be available to the members of his parish regardless of the time. Some more questions get thrown towards him, and before they leave, Mayer asks him to hand over his phone. Later that evening, Mayer gets ready for the date and Richard comes to pick her up. Helen is more excited about the date than Mayer is. On their little date, they talk about each other's personal life. Mayer even shares Kevin's death and Andrew's mother trying to get his custody. Hearing this, Richard tells her to sit and talk with Carrie about wanting to be a part of Andrew's life. In the next scene, Siobhan meets Anne Harris during the radio program at Haverford College. Anne is fancied by Siobhan, so she doesn't hesitate to make the first move, asking Siobhan out for the concert. However, since Siobhan is in a relationship with Becca, she doesn't want to give Anne false hope, so she regrets her advances. A few days later, a bunch of kids, while playing football, find the missing part of Aaron's finger. So Mayer and Colin are asked to investigate in Brandywine Park. Mayer believes this park to be the crime scene. Therefore, she orders to seal the area. Since no bullets were lodged in Aaron's body, the bullet casings should be lying somewhere in the park. Metal detectors might not be effective, so she asks Colin to call for all 6 firearm canines from the county. After searching for 5 hours, Mayer finally spots a bullet lodged in one of the trees. The following day, an anonymous caller asks the police to look into the circumstances of Deacon Mark's transfer to St. Michael's. Mayer and Colin directly go to Mark, but he doesn't open the door for them. Later, in the depth of the night, we see Mark dumping Aaron's pink bike in the river. On the other side, Mayer and Carrie's conversation does not go smoothly. Mayer wants to put off the custody process for the time being, but Carrie is hell-bent on getting her son back with her. Desperate to get her son back, Mayer steals 2 packets of drugs from the evidence storage room and plants them in Carrie's car. The very next morning, the chief comes to her house and tells her that Carrie got apprehended with 2 packets of heroin. Carrie's claim that it was Mayer who planted the drugs in her car. Just to be sure, the chief checks on the evidence storage and finds 2 packets missing and discovers Carrie's telling the truth. The chief wants to make sure Mayer never gets to wear the badge for what she's done, but he knows that she's worth saving, so he puts Mayer on administrative leave and asks her to attend grief counseling. However, he asks her for the gun and the badge. Meanwhile, Lori reveals the story about her being suspended from work. She advises Mare to take a break and connect with the family as she's been pushing everyone away. Following Lori's advice, Mare calls for the family meeting and opens up about her suspension due to stealing drugs and planting them in Carrie's car. Helen and Siobhan are speechless to hear this. While they're at it, Siobhan tells them that she's broken up with Becca. The next morning, Colin gets appalled when he finds Detective Hauser in Mare's cabin. The chief tells him that Mare has stepped back from the case to deal with her personal stuff and that Hauser will assist him with the case. Before leaving, he reveals that neither Frank nor Dylan is DJ's father. In the meantime, Dawn gets a call demanding $5,000 in exchange for Katie's life. She doesn't tell anybody about the call, except Beth. Finding it a bit suspicious, Beth warns her that it might turn out to be a scam. Beth tells her to inform Mare about it, but Dawn already knows that Mare's out of work for the time being. Now that Mare has all the time in the world, she visits Dr. Graham for grief counseling. She tells the doctor that the therapy helps some people, but she doesn't belong to that class. However, Dr. Graham asks her to give it a try and see how it goes. Despite being on official leave, Mare can't keep herself from digging more about the case. She goes through Erin's social media account and finds out that she used to write diaries. While looking at Erin's video, she's reminded of her own past when she had a hard time dealing with Kevin and Carrie stealing from her to buy more drugs. Now, with Mare out of the case, Colin's very busy at work. He locates Deacon Mark and asks him why he's been transferred to this parish. He brings forth the sexual misconduct complaint filed against Mark in the previous parish. Mark gets angry and tells him that the Archdiocese has already investigated the incident and declared him clean of charges. Around the same time, another girl, Missy Sager, goes missing. After seeing the news, Mare goes to Colin's house to discuss this case, even though she's not involved in the case directly. Colin tells her that Missy was a top student, but after an accident, she started using drugs and her downfall begins. He thinks that maybe Katie and Missy's cases are related, as both of them were known drug abusers involved in prostitution. But that's not the case with Erin. Mare points out that Erin might also have been involved in prostitution in secret. They go back to Jess and ask how Erin was going to get the money for the surgery if Dylan still refuses to pay. Jess is reluctant to speak at first, but only after making her realize that her silence might be actually helping the killer, she opens her mouth. She tells the detectives that Erin had once asked her to open an account for the escort website. However, she swears that Erin couldn't gather the courage to meet men, so she backed off. Soon, Mare privately asks Jess where Erin kept her journals. The next day, Mare once again goes back to Kenny's house and searches the dresser. She finds some cards and a locket with a date engraved in it, but finds no journals. On the other side, Dawn once again gets the call. This time, the person on the other side makes her believe that he has Katie with him. He tells Dawn about Katie's tattoo of her daughter's birthday on her ankle. He asks her to prepare the money by tomorrow night and threatens that she'll only be able to find Katie's bone if she contacts the police. The next night, leaving her granddaughter in the care of Beth, she goes to meet the caller at an abandoned house on the outskirts of town. Beforehand, she's prepared a gun to take with her. When Dawn enters the house and is cautiously heading towards the basement, a man charges at her from behind and yanks her purse off her. She runs after the man, but unfortunately, she collides with the empty water filter and falls to the ground. However, Dawn manages to take a look at the man's face, who's devastated to find a gun and a bundle of paper in the purse instead of money. It turns out to be her friend, Beth's brother, Freddie. Next, Dawn comes home all bruised up and lies about the wounds to Beth, but she doesn't speak a word about Freddie to her. On the other hand, the kidnapper drags Missy into a house behind a bar named Benny's Cavern. He locks her in a small room, but she's not alone there. It turns out the kidnapper has held Katie Bailey captive all this time. After that, Katie takes care of Missy while she's going through withdrawal syndrome. She tells Missy that there was a girl named Hillary before her, but Hillary got pregnant, and after that, Katie never saw her again. Having to live life in this cell for a whole year, Katie knows that on Friday, the kidnapper has people come over for poker night, and he'll have the girls tied up so they won't make a scene. As today happens to be Friday, the kidnapper comes and Katie obediently ties a piece of cloth around her mouth and the man chains her hands. Around the same time, while driving the car, Betty Carroll crashes into an electricity pole. With that crash, the pole collapses, causing a blackout in the town. But when the police arrive at the scene, she's already gone. Later, it's revealed that Betty suffered a heart attack. The next day, Mare visits her therapist for her regular counseling. The The doctor asks if the mood disorder runs in the family. She reveals that her father suffered from depression, and whenever he was in a low mood, he used to spend his days with his brother in Drexel Hill, but her father couldn't take it anymore and shot himself. Mare also admits that when Kevin started becoming difficult to deal with, she had a few episodes of depression. She's terrified that this might be hereditary and is scared that Andrew might turn out to be like her dad or Kevin. Later that night, the Ross family with their children come over to Mare's house for a get-together. Lori and John let her know that Kenny has asked them to adopt DJ and that they're thinking about it. Everyone was well aware that Kenny didn't treat Erin well while she was alive, and that the Ross family has taken care of Erin after Kenny's wife passed away. From their conversation, Mare comes to know that Erin even lived with Billy for a month or two. But when she starts asking more questions about it, Billy gets uncomfortable and walks away, making excuses of meeting a friend. After Dylan comes to know that he's not DJ's real father, he starts hating the boy. But eventually, seeing his parents love DJ despite not being their own blood, he also begins to care for him. One night, Dylan tells Brianna that his parents are willing to keep DJ. She asks him how he'll feel if he needs to keep seeing DJ every day. Furthermore, Brianna asks him if he has anything to talk about the night Erin died, because when she woke up that night, he was not in bed. She even searched for him in the whole house, but couldn't find him. Meanwhile, in school, Lori's son Ryan couldn't tolerate his sister being bullied, so he hits those boys. Lori has noticed that Ryan seems disturbed for the past few days, and the other night, she saw John and Ryan talking about some secrets. So after getting her son from school, Lori asks him if his stress is related to his father, John. In the past, John has cheated on Lori, and she suspects him to be doing it again, which was caught on by Ryan. She calmly asks if John has been doing it again and if it's the same woman, and Ryan nods his head to answer her. Later that night, John packs up his stuff and leaves for his father's house. Meanwhile, Mare meets one of the informants who tells her that she's seen Missy a couple of times hanging outside the Harrah's. Mare asks her to talk with the girls around the area and find out if someone suspicious is trying to pick them up. It's Saturday now, and Mare has a choice to make: either celebrate Richard's birthday with him or go out for dinner with Colin. The suspension has not been lifted yet, so she decides to choose Colin's invitation, only to get more details about the case from him. Throughout the ride and dinner, Mare doesn't stop asking him about the case, while Colin just wants to have a pleasant dinner with her. On the other hand, Dylan and a friend pick Jess up, and they trespass into Kenny's house to get Erin's old journals. Dylan and Jess have made a deal of burning those journals without reading them, in case something about DJ's real father has been written in them. Dylan wants DJ to stay with him, while Jess wants to honor Erin's wish for DJ to be brought up in a warm family. But if DJ's real father's identity comes out in the open, it might not turn out in their favor. However, Jess secretly pockets a picture found in one of Erin's diaries. One night, Deacon Mark returns back with his face wound up as he was bullied by some teenagers, shaming him for being a pedophile. Father Dan gets concerned and asks if he was all right. Mark breaks down into tears and confesses that he was with Erin the night she was killed. He continues and tells him that Erin called him to pick her up, but midway she asked him to drop her at Brandywine Park after receiving a text. Dan questions why he didn't tell the truth to the police. Mark has the previous accusation of assault, and don't forget he had Erin's bike in his car trunk. Because of this, he was, and still is, scared to tell the truth to the police, but he swears that he didn't kill her. A few days later, Mare asks Colin to accompany her to meet someone. That day, Colin's mother doesn't want him to go with Mare, who's been stripped of her right to access the case. However, Colin tags along with her and meets the girl that Mare's informant has found. The girl shares her experience of meeting one guy who seemed pretty normal, but when she started undressing, he began choking her with his hands around her neck. To save herself, she started kicking and fighting, and that must be when she hit him really hard in his face. Grabbing this opportunity, the girl claims to have jumped out of the car. The informant gives them some clues that this man is white, has a beard, and smokes Winston's. She tells the detectives that the vehicle was a blue work van and also gives them a part of the license plate that she remembers. And with the help of this clue, Colin uses his connections to make his people look for the van. While they're waiting for a response, Mare and Colin have a deep conversation. She apologizes for walking out of their dinner the other night. Mare tells him that she can't fulfill his desires, while she has a lot on her plate right now. Her grandson's custody, her ex-husband living with his new family right by her backyard, and her suspension, to name a few. Now Colin comes clean as he confesses to not having solved that old case, which gave him a meteoric rise to fame. The parents of the missing girl had hired a private investigator who contacted him to compare notes. Anyway, he got his hands on that investigator's notes, and only by using the loophole of the case that the other guy noticed, he was able to solve the case. Colin seems to regret doing this. Then it's time for Mare to reveal the reason for her suspension. She admits to planting the drugs on Andrew's mother's car so that she won't get his custody. They both know that they're as much screwed up as the other person, but the expectations others have of them are immense, which sometimes leads to disappointment. After 2 hours, Colin gets a call saying that they've located 7 vans that fit the given description. They immediately head to the addresses provided to ask the vehicle owners some questions. The third house they knock at is of Wayne Potts, the same house that has Bernie's Cavern at the front. They ask him if they can come in and ask him a few questions, and when they enter the house, the detectives notice Winston's cigarettes and also some cameras installed. Katie hears people talking downstairs, but since Wayne didn't chain them up, that means the visitors are unexpected guests. Katie and Missy immediately start hitting the radiator pipe to grab the attention of whomever's downstairs. Upon hearing the noise, Wayne tells the detectives that it's just a busted radiator pipe that needs to be repaired at once. But the clanking of the pipe becomes so extreme that it almost comes off. Mare signals Colin to take action, but before he could take his gun out, Wayne is a step ahead and he shoots Colin right in the head with precision. Mare gets shot in her hand as she tries to cover her head while running. Smashing the things on the way, she runs upstairs and sees the girls locked in a room. She tries to, but can't open the door, so she immediately alerts the police through text. Mare hasn't noticed the camera on the wall, but when she does, she narrowly escapes being shot as Wayne is already upstairs after locating her through the camera. Mare slams his head with a slab and runs downstairs. He comes chasing after her, but fortunately, Mare manages to grab Colin's gun and shoots the guy multiple times. The terrified Mare collapses on the floor as the police arrive at the scene. A day later, Mare opens her eyes in the hospital and sees her family waiting for her. Katie returns back home after a year and reunites with her mother and her daughter, but unfortunately, it cost them Colin's life. After Father Dan reports everything that Mark has said to him, the police fish out Aaron's bike from the river, and Mark has been arrested. A few days later, Laurie and Helen bring Mare back home from the hospital. Laurie hasn't got a chance to tell Mare about John cheating on her with Sandra again. Mare feels sorry for Laurie and the children upon hearing it, and she advises her not to fall for John's charm and take him back. That evening, Mare visits Colin's mother to pay her deepest sympathy for her loss. However, the devastated mother, who's recently lost her son, thinks that Colin would be alive if Mare didn't ask him to accompany her the other day. So she returns her sympathy with 2 slaps on Mare's cheek. Mare breaks down into tears as soon as she comes back home, and Helen provides her a shoulder to cry on. The next day, the chief meets with Mare and tells her that Katie's case is not related to Aaron's, as Wayne was in Altoona visiting his mother the day Aaron was killed. He then asks Mare to join the case and returns her badge. In the afternoon, Richard visits Mare with a gift basket. After having a little chat, Mare confesses that she'd gone on a date ditching him on his birthday, and she knows that it wasn't the right thing to do. She tells him that she's not ready to take things seriously with him, as she's pressed with other things at the moment. In response, Richard tells her that she can give him a call whenever she's ready. Back in the station, the expert concludes that the gun used in killing Aaron is a Colt Detective special revolver that used to be popular in the past, but is not produced anymore. Just then, Mare gets a message from Brianna asking to meet her. When the chief and Mare arrive at Brianna's house, she tells them that Dylan is not in the house that day when she woke up at 2 in the morning. Tony also apologizes for his misconduct and praises her bravery in bringing Katie home. Based on Brianna's statement, Dylan is once again called in for interrogation. He tells the detectives that he couldn't sleep that night and was roaming around smoking. Mare questions if he stole Aaron's journals, but instead of answering, Dylan demands a lawyer. Mare diligently pays the therapist another visit and shares that she's been experiencing panic attacks after solving the case. She tells her that she's not good enough to deserve the expectations of the people. Dr. Graham puts forth her opinion that Mare has not properly grieved her own son's death and is seeking an external solution to her internal pain. She asks Mare if she could tell her about the day Kevin died. That day, Mare got a call from her neighbor to tell her that they spotted Kevin in the house. Frank was unavailable at the moment, so instead of going back home herself, she called Siobhan to check on her brother. Then, moments later, Siobhan called her crying hysterically. When Mare reached home, Siobhan was crying and Kevin was hanging on one of the beams in the attic. She tells the doctor that no one has gone into the attic since then. Around that time, Beth is worried about Freddie not answering her call for the past 3 days. So she calls Mayor to check into Freddie's house after confirming with his neighbor that someone had seen him enter the house a few days before. When Mayor enters the house, Freddie's passed away due to an overdose. However, Beth notices McMenamin and the Ross family reunion t-shirt with a date printed on it. The date coincides with the date engraved on the locket she found in Aaron's room. At Freddie's funeral, Mayor asks Lori about the Ross family reunion at Lake Harmony. Lori tells her that after Aaron's mother died, they wanted to do something for Kenny and Aaron, so John booked a few cabins at the lake and their whole family stayed there enjoying their weekend. Later, Dawn comes to thank Mayor for bringing Katie back home. That night, Siobhan comes home drunk. She's been frustrated as she couldn't get hold of Anne for the past few days. In her drunken state, she mutters that it should have been you that day. She tells Mayor that she hates her for making her find him. Then she starts crying and yelling at Mayor. Seeing the state of her daughter, Mayor apologizes and calms Siobhan down in her tight hug. The next day, Mayor visits Kenny in prison and asks him about the t-shirts. In response, Kenny tells her that he'd given Freddie permission to take those t-shirts for his daughter. When Mayor asks him about the Ross family reunion, Kenny tells her that there was nothing unusual that needs to be mentioned. He and Aaron stayed in Billy's cabin as there were a couple of extra rooms. Regarding Andrew's custody, Mayor goes to have a talk with Frank. The therapy surely has helped her a lot, and she wants to give Carrie a chance to fulfill her duty as a mother. She's preparing Andrew and herself for the possible outcome. In the meantime, Andrew has started sleeping over at Carrie's, which can help him to acclimatize. Back in John's father's house, the old man is fed up with both of his sons. John gets kicked out by Lori after getting caught, and Billy has started acting strangely. A few days after John moved in, the old man is unable to hold it in any longer and reveals to John that a night before Aaron's death, Billy came home around 3 or 4 in the morning and was covered in blood. Later, John talks with Billy regarding the matter. He tells her that their father has seen him covered in blood, and Mayor started digging for the clue, and it's just a matter of time before she finds out. Amidst all of this, John forces Billy to admit that he killed the little girl. The next morning, John goes to Lori and reveals everything and asks her to keep it hidden from Mayor. Upon returning back home, Billy tells John that he's ready to confess. So John asks Billy to go fishing with them for one last time before he turns himself in. Meanwhile, Mayor comes to Lori and asks where Billy is. Lori swears that she didn't know it before. But just in the morning, John told her that Billy is DJ's father, and he shot Aaron after she threatened to reveal it. Lori also gives Mayor the location of the fishing spot Billy and John are headed to. Then she immediately drives to the fishing cabin. On her way, she informs the chief that Billy killed Aaron, and he's also DJ's real father. Right after the phone call, Jess Riley comes to the station saying she has information on Aaron. Since Mayor's away, the chief himself attends to her. She shows him the picture she's found in Aaron's diary, the photo of Aaron and John on the same bed. As soon as he sees the picture, the chief tries contacting Aaron, but she's out of reach. Meanwhile, Billy sees a gun in the toolbox before they head toward the fishing cabin. He's already figured out that John wants to kill him in the river and make it appear that he took his own life. He's just hoping that he's wrong. And regrettably, John stands in front of him holding the gun. With John pointing the gun at him, Billy yells to pull the trigger. But when Mayor shows up and tells him to put the gun down, he doesn't have any option, so he tries to take his own life. Luckily, Billy doesn't let him do so. He stalls him until Mayor comes closer and holds John down. Billy tells her that he didn't do it, while John asks her to kill him, and seeing these two brothers in such a state confuses her even more. Later, during interrogation, John admits that his relationship with Aaron started at the reunion. He tells her that they had a connection and confided with each other that they both were having troubles back home. Their incestuous relationship got Aaron pregnant, but she refused to get an abortion. When asked about the night of Aaron's death, John tells them that Aaron had called him from her other prepaid phone and asked him to meet, and if not, she'd tell Lori about them. So after the party, he drove to Brandywine Park. He reveals that Aaron was furious that night, and with a gun, she tried to shoot herself. While trying to wrestle for the gun, the trigger got pulled and the bullet hit Aaron's hand. He panicked after that and ended up shooting her in the face. John even admits to dragging her dead body back into the woods with the help of Billy so that it might look like some other kids killed her. When Mayor asks if Lori was aware of all this, John reveals that he convinced her to lie to the detectives. On the following day, John is found guilty by the court and is taken to prison. But before he goes away, he asks Lori if she could adopt DJ. Now, everyone seems to return back to their lives. Katie gets a new house, and Laurie adopts DJ. Carrie and Mare have a hearing for Andrew's custody, but Carrie does not show up. She couldn't bring herself to enter the room and call Mare out. Carrie tells her that she can't take him, and it's not because she didn't want to. She's back to taking drugs because she needs them to stay awake juggling between jobs. Furthermore, Carrie reveals that she'll be heading straight to the rehabilitation center from there. A few days after that, when Mare's family, along with Frank and Faye, are at a restaurant to discuss the couple's wedding, they see Sandra Elliott, the girl John cheated on Laurie for. Mare cusses at Sandra and asks if her husband knows that she was screwing with John again. But Sandra casually tells her that it was an affair of the past and now she's happy with her husband. In the next scene, Mare goes back to watch John's interrogation video where he tells them that he does not particularly remember the gun, but it seemed like a regular one. But there's a twist. The gun that was used to kill Aaron is a Colt special gun. And just like that, Frank and Faye get married. Richard also has to move away when things were just getting started with him and Mare. The next day, Mr. Carroll calls Mare over. Ever since his wife, Betty, passed away, he couldn't keep track of things. He tells her that his gun disappeared and reappeared back in the shed in his backyard. When asked, Carroll tells her that it was a Colt Detective Special, the one he got after he retired. He shows Mare the gun and tells her that there are 2 rounds missing. When Mare asks who had access to the shed, Mr. Carroll replies himself and Ryan Ross, who cuts the lawn for him. Mare immediately rushes back in and checks the footage from that night and sees Ryan leaving with a gun at night. Next, Mare goes to Ryan's school to meet him. But when he sees her, he flees back to his house and hides under his mother's arms. But Mare has enough reasons and apprehends him from there. During interrogation, Ryan wants to get done with it, so is ready to tell them the truth. Ryan came to know about his father's relationship with Aaron through their text messages. He even confronted John about it, and John told him that it was just a mistake. Ryan promised to keep it a secret for the sake of his family. But on the day of Frank's engagement party, he'd seen John arguing with someone on the phone. Later, when he checked John's phone, he noticed a text message asking him to come to the park. So Ryan went to get Mr. Carroll's gun before heading to the park. He just wanted to scare Aaron with the gun. Who knew that when they fought over the gun, he would accidentally shoot her? Ryan then called his father in a panic, who took care of Aaron's body with the help of Billy. While revealing all this, Ryan genuinely regrets the things he had done. Laurie would have taken the secret to her grave if Mare didn't dig more after John was arrested, so she loathes Mare for taking her son away from her. Subsequently, things cooled down in Easttown after 8 long months. Laurie now accepts DJ as her son. Siobhan is also moving away for her higher studies, and Deacon Mark is back in the parish. On the other hand, Mare doesn't give up on her best friend Laurie, who's now stopped pushing her. One morning, Mare wakes up and decides to deal with her grief. She pulls down the attic stair and ascends into the attic again after a long time.